Before she became a war hero, before she stood beside Harry Potter in the face of Voldemort, and long before the wizarding world knew her name, Hermione Granger lived a quiet, ordinary life in the Muggle world. Born on the 19th of September, 1979, Hermione Jean Granger was the only child of two loving, intelligent, and hard-working Muggle parents who worked as dentists. Her home life was stable, her family supportive, and her upbringing steeped in the rational, logical thinking typical of the non-magical world. From an early age, Hermione stood out not for her magical abilities, which had yet to reveal themselves, but for her insatiable curiosity and drive to learn. Hermione's childhood was marked by a thirst for knowledge that often made her seem far older than her years. She was the kind of child who preferred books over games, encyclopedias over fairy tales. While other children her age might have played outside or watched television, Hermione would lose herself for hours in books, captivated by the wonders of the world, constantly searching for answers to questions few others her age were asking. Her mind was a whirlwind of facts, theories, and big dreams, and though some might have called her precocious or even bossy, it was clear to everyone around her that Hermione was gifted. But there was something else, something no book in the Muggle world could explain. Strange things happened around Hermione. Small, impossible things. Once, she panicked at a piano recital and somehow caused the sheet music to float off the stand and turn itself to the right page. Another time, a particularly nasty bully at school found themselves hanging upside down by their shoelaces from a tree branch without anyone touching them. Her parents were bewildered, but Hermione was fascinated. Deep down, she sensed there was something different about her, something beyond ordinary logic. She didn't fear it. She wanted to understand it. That understanding came the day she received a letter. Not just any letter, a parchment envelope with emerald green ink, sealed with a wax crest bearing a lion, eagle, badger, and snake. The letter came from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At first, her parents thought it was some elaborate joke. Magic, after all, was something reserved for fairy tales. But for Hermione, the letter was a revelation, an answer to the mystery she had sensed her whole life. A man from the Ministry of Magic, a wizard, visited the Grangers and explained everything. Their daughter was a witch, born to Muggle parents but with magic in her blood. This wasn't unheard of. She was what the wizarding world called a Muggle-born. Hermione's eyes lit up with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. She had always believed there was more to the world than what met the eye, and now she had proof. She wasn't strange or broken, she was magical. She took to the news with enthusiasm, diving headfirst into everything she could find about magic. Before the start of term, she had already read all her Hogwarts books twice. She knew the names of spells, potion ingredients, magical creatures, and historical dates long before she stepped foot on school grounds. To Hermione, the wizarding world wasn't just a new adventure, it was her true home. Her enthusiasm, however, was not without its consequences. When Hermione boarded the Hogwarts Express for the first time, she was excited but also painfully aware of how little she knew compared to students from magical families. She had no older siblings to teach her spells or explain Quidditch. Her wand was new, her robes still stiff, and her knowledge, though vast, was theoretical. To compensate, she worked harder than anyone else. She studied constantly, practiced spells in her compartment, and nervously tried to befriend her peers, though her eagerness often came off as smugness. It was on that train that she first met Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, though their introduction was less than charming. Hermione barged into their cabin while looking for Neville's lost toad, correcting Ron's spellwork and lecturing them about Hogwarts history. She was, in Ron's words, a nightmare. But underneath that bossy exterior was a girl trying desperately to prove herself, not only to others, but to herself. As a Muggle-born in a strange new world, Hermione carried the unspoken pressure of needing to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. Once at Hogwarts, Hermione was sorted into Gryffindor, though it might have surprised some who assumed her intellect would land her in Ravenclaw. The sorting hat itself even hesitated, sensing traits from both houses. But ultimately, her bravery, determination, and willingness to stand up for what was right placed her among the lions. From that moment on, Hermione poured herself into her studies and school life, quickly becoming the top of nearly every class. She mastered spells with uncanny precision, brewed complex potions without flaw, and could quote Hogwarts, a history at will. Still, despite her brilliance, Hermione struggled to connect with others. Her intense focus on rules, perfectionism, and eagerness to impress often alienated her from her classmates. She was teased for being a know-it-all, a teacher's pet, and for raising her hand in class before questions were even finished. But her resolve didn't waver. Hermione wasn't seeking popularity. She was driven by a deeper force, a need to belong in a world that she wasn't born into. That need culminated in a pivotal moment during her first year, when she overheard Ron mock her for having no friends. Hurt and humiliated, she locked herself in the bathroom, unknowingly placing herself in mortal danger as a troll was let loose in the school. But it was that very event that changed everything. Harry and Ron, realizing their mistake, rushed in to save her, and Hermione, in turn, lied to protect them from punishment. That act of mutual bravery and compassion cemented a bond between the trio that would last a lifetime. From that day forward, Hermione was no longer just the girl with all the answers. She was Harry's best friend, Ron's fiercest ally, a Gryffindor through and through. Her journey had only just begun, but the foundation of her character, courage, loyalty, and unrelenting intellect was already firmly set. As the years unfolded and the shadows of Voldemort grew darker, Hermione Granger would become far more than the brightest witch of her age. She would become one of the greatest heroines the wizarding world had ever known. Hermione Granger stood on the bustling concourse of King's Cross Station, clutching her ticket with slightly trembling hands. Platform 9 3/4. Her parents, smiling nervously, stood beside her, offering gentle encouragement. It was a strange thing, really. They were used to train platforms labeled with whole numbers, not fractions. As dentists and rational thinkers, the entire wizarding world still seemed like a fantasy they hadn't quite processed. But Hermione had no such hesitation. Her eyes were scanning the station, alive with curiosity and anticipation. And then she saw it, a boy with untidy hair, accompanied by a group of red-haired siblings, the Weasleys. Watching them, she quickly pieced together how to reach the platform. With her usual precision, she adjusted her robes, took a deep breath, and stepped through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. The magical world opened up before her. The Hogwarts Express was majestic and alive with activity. Steam curled into the air, owls hooted in cages, trunks were being lifted, and students bustled about in black robes and excited chatter. For Hermione, this moment was the culmination of weeks of reading and preparation. But experiencing it in person brought a new level of awe. She boarded the train alone. Her parents had no part in this world. And though they were proud, she knew they couldn't follow her into what came next. Hermione wandered the corridors of the train, looking for an empty compartment and a place to settle her nerves. Her bushy hair was wild from the steam, her new robes still stiff with creases. She had a copy of Hogwarts, a history tucked under one arm, and her wand, the 11-inch vinewood with dragon heartstring core, was tucked securely away. Every so often, she would pause to observe the magical suites, the floating lanterns, or overhear a spell gone wrong from a fellow first year. Everything was incredible. At one point, while assisting a frantic boy named Neville Longbottom in his search for his missing toad, Hermione entered a compartment already occupied by two boys, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. This moment would prove monumental, though none of them knew it yet. Hermione, always eager to be helpful and prove herself, introduced herself with a kind of fast-talking efficiency. "I'm Hermione Granger. And you are?" Her tone was confident, perhaps overly so. She corrected Ron on the pronunciation of a spell, flexed her magical knowledge, and mentioned having tried a few spells on the train already. Unsurprisingly, Ron rolled his eyes the moment she left. To Ron and Harry, Hermione initially came off as a know-it-all. And to be fair, she was. But underneath her smug exterior was a girl trying to find her place in a world she had only just discovered. She overcompensated with facts and authority because it was all she had. Hermione had no wizarding siblings to guide her, no heritage to lean on, and no innate understanding of this world. What she did have was knowledge, and she clung to it like a lifeline. When the train finally arrived at Hogsmeade Station, Hermione's heart nearly burst with excitement. She joined the rest of the first years in a fleet of boats that floated across the Black Lake, offering their first glimpse of Hogwarts Castle, towering and majestic against the night sky. The sight was so magical, so dreamlike, that even Hermione, who had read every book about the school, was stunned into silence. Inside the castle, the first years were led into the Great Hall, a vast chamber lit by floating candles and enchanted with a ceiling that mirrored the night sky. Hermione was fascinated, whispering to nearby students that the ceiling was bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts: A History. Her enthusiasm was met with mixed reactions. Some admired her knowledge, others found it irritating. Then came the sorting ceremony. Hermione was called to the front. "Granger, Hermione," and sat beneath the sorting hat, her heart pounding. The hat deliberated. It saw her cleverness, her craving for knowledge, and strongly considered placing her in Ravenclaw. But beneath her intellect was an unmistakable bravery, a readiness to stand up for others, and a will to fight for what was right. With a decisive shout, the hat declared, "Gryffindor!" Hermione beamed and rushed to join her new housemates at the long table clad in red and gold. Already, she was mentally preparing for the semester ahead. She would need to study hard, prove herself, and learn everything there was to know about magic. In the first days of school, Hermione quickly made an impression on her professors. In charms, she performed the Wingardium Leviosa levitation charm perfectly on her first try. In Transfiguration, she turned matches into needles with alarming precision. Even Professor Snape, who rarely gave praise to anyone not in Slytherin, grudgingly acknowledged her capabilities, though not without his trademark cruelty. But while she excelled academically, Hermione still struggled socially. Her perfectionism, eagerness to answer every question, and lack of interest in typical childhood distractions isolated her. Many students found her overbearing. She corrected them, scolded them for breaking rules, and couldn't understand why others didn't share her obsession with homework and preparation. Though she never admitted it aloud, Hermione often felt lonely. She was succeeding in class, but failing to form real friendships. All of that began to change with one pivotal incident: the troll in the dungeon. It was Halloween night. The Great Hall had been decorated with floating pumpkins, bats, and festive treats. But during the feast, Professor Quirrell burst into the room, screaming about a troll loose in the castle. In the chaos, Hermione, who had been crying in the bathroom after overhearing Ron make fun of her, was trapped alone with the creature. Harry and Ron, realizing she was in danger, defied the prefects and rushed to save her. They managed to knock the troll out in a frantic battle, and when professors arrived, Hermione lied to protect the boys, claiming she had gone looking for the troll and that they had simply tried to rescue her. It was a moment of shared bravery, a silent understanding. From that night on, the dynamic changed. Hermione was no longer just the irritating know-it-all. She became part of something, a trio that would go on to face dangers beyond anything they could imagine. Platform 9 3/4 had not only taken Hermione to a school of magic, it had taken her to a new life, one filled with challenges, wonder, and a friendship that would define her destiny. The lonely, bookish girl from the Muggle world was now a witch, a student of Hogwarts, and above all, a friend. And for Hermione Granger, that was just the beginning. For Hermione Granger, the first year at Hogwarts was more than just an introduction to spells and potions. It was a trial by fire that would define the very core of her character. Amidst the wonder of magical education, broomsticks, and enchanted staircases, Hermione would come face to face with danger, deception, and choices that tested her bravery, loyalty, and intellect. It was during this inaugural year, through the events surrounding the legendary Philosopher's Stone, that the world would catch its first glimpse of the witch who would one day help shape the fate of the wizarding world. From the beginning of the school year, Hermione had thrown herself into her studies with unmatched enthusiasm. She spent her evenings in the common room, with piles of books and scrolls, correcting Ron's homework, reciting incantations under her breath, and memorizing potion ingredients until she could list them in alphabetical order. While her dedication earned her admiration from professors like Professor McGonagall, it also drew the ire of her peers, who saw her as a goody two-shoes. But Hermione didn't care about popularity. Her priority was excellence. Still, beneath her academic perfection was a young girl learning what it meant to be brave. That transformation began subtly. First, there were the whispers about the third-floor corridor, a part of the castle strictly forbidden to students. Then came the strange behavior of professors, the odd way Snape was watching Harry during Quidditch matches, and the curious case of Fluffy, the massive three-headed dog guarding a trapdoor. When Hermione, Harry, and Ron stumbled upon Fluffy one night, after an unfortunate encounter with a wandering Peeves, they realized something was being hidden beneath the school, and it was worth protecting. For Hermione, the revelation didn't just spark curiosity, it raised a deeper concern. If Hogwarts was hiding something this dangerous, and if someone like Snape was involved, students were in real danger. Her natural instinct to follow rules began to clash with a growing sense of responsibility to protect others. What followed was a slow unraveling of mystery. When Harry's broom was jinxed during a match, Hermione didn't hesitate. She rushed across the stands, knocked over Professor Quirrell, and ignited Snape's robes with a simple bluebell flame to stop the interference. At the time, she believed Snape was the culprit. But what truly mattered wasn't whether she was right, it was that Hermione acted. The girl who once obeyed every rule had just broken one to save a friend. As the trio grew closer, their bond deepened. They balanced each other. Harry was the heart, Ron the humor, and Hermione the mind. She helped them with spells, research, and logic, and in return, they taught her to loosen up, to laugh, and to trust her instincts more than her textbooks. Their biggest test came in the final stretch of the school year. After weeks of investigation and tension, they concluded that someone was trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, an object rumored to grant eternal life and limitless wealth. Believing Snape to be the would-be thief, and knowing that Professor Dumbledore had been called away from the castle, the trio made a decision. They would go after the stone themselves. That night, as they descended through the trapdoor beneath Fluffy, Hermione stepped into her most heroic role yet. Each challenge that lay ahead played to a different strength among the trio, and Hermione's contributions were vital at nearly every stage. First was the descent through Devil's Snare, a deadly magical plant that tightened around its victims the more they struggled. Ron and Harry panicked, but Hermione remembered what she had read. Devil's Snare hates sunlight. With calm clarity, she conjured a lumos solemn spell that drove the plant away, saving them from being strangled. The next room was filled with flying keys, one of which would unlock the next door. Harry's broomstick skills took center stage here, but it was Hermione who had the foresight to observe patterns, noting the rusted key with a bent wing as the likely target. Her logic and attention to detail gave them the advantage they needed. But it was the potion's riddle that truly showcased Hermione's brilliance. After Ron sacrificed himself in a game of wizard's chess to clear the way for Harry to continue, Hermione and Harry found themselves facing a table of potions, some deadly, one to move forward and one to retreat. A logic puzzle, not magic, held the key. While most witches and wizards would have struggled wands useless against riddles, Hermione thrived. She calmly deduced the solution using logic alone, choosing the correct potion to send Harry onward and taking the one that would allow her to return and help Ron. In that moment, she faced a difficult choice: stay and fight or trust Harry to finish the task alone. She didn't hesitate. "You're a great wizard, Harry," she said, with more sincerity than he'd ever heard. And when he protested, telling her he wasn't as smart as she was, Hermione delivered one of her most defining lines: "Books and cleverness. There are more important things, friendship and bravery." That moment encapsulated her evolution. Hermione, who once measured her worth through academic achievement, now recognized the deeper values that made a true hero. She had gone from rule-abiding perfectionist to a fierce, loyal friend willing to break rules, face danger, and put others before herself. Though it was Harry who ultimately faced Professor Quirrell and Voldemort for the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione's role was just as vital. Without her intellect, their journey would have ended in the very first room. And though she didn't stand at the final confrontation, she stood behind Harry and Ron at every step that led there. Her courage was quieter, less showy, but just as powerful. When the school year ended and House Cup points were being awarded, Dumbledore gave a final few points that tipped the balance in Gryffindor's favor. One of them went to Hermione, for the use of cool logic in the face of fire. It was a simple phrase, but it spoke volumes. It acknowledged not just what Hermione had done, but how she had done it. Calm, brave, intelligent, and fiercely loyal. By the end of her first year, Hermione Granger was no longer just the top student in her class. She was 1/3 of a trio that would change history. She had earned the respect of her peers, the trust of her friends, and the beginnings of a legacy that would outlast her time at Hogwarts. And though she returned home for the summer to the Muggle world, a part of her would always remain at Hogwarts on that 3rd floor, beneath the trapdoor, in the flames of the Bluebell fire, and in the quiet brilliance of a riddle solved under pressure. Her journey had only just begun. When Hermione Granger returned to Hogwarts for her 2nd year, she did so with a renewed sense of purpose. No longer the outsider trying to prove herself, she was now an integral part of the trio that had saved the Philosopher's Stone. Yet as much as she had grown, she had no idea what the year ahead held. A series of dark, terrifying events that would test her intellect, her courage, and her very place within the wizarding world. The tone of the school year shifted almost immediately. Rumors began to swirl about an ancient legend, the reopening of something called the Chamber of Secrets. Whispers filled the corridors. Teachers looked anxious, and students were suddenly wary. But when Argus Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris, was discovered petrified, with a terrifying message painted in blood across the wall: "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware," everything changed. For Hermione, who thrived on order, logic, and understanding, this kind of chaos was deeply unsettling. But rather than cower in fear, she took action in the only way she knew how: by researching. Hermione practically moved into the library, poring over tomes of Hogwarts history, magical lore, and obscure legends. It was during these long hours that she uncovered the tale of Salazar Slytherin and the hidden chamber he allegedly constructed, a place that could only be opened by his heir, and which supposedly housed a monster meant to purge the school of those he deemed unworthy. For Hermione, this wasn't just ancient myth, it was personal. As a Muggle-born witch, she represented everything Slytherin despised. The blood purity rhetoric wasn't just abstract ideology. It was a real and present threat, and Hermione, brilliant, brave, and determined, refused to be a victim of it. But prejudice was no longer lurking in shadows. It was now spoken aloud. Draco Malfoy, never one to conceal his contempt, began using the slur mudblood openly. When he called Hermione the term during a dueling club session, the reaction was immediate and electric. Ron Weasley, enraged, attempted to curse Draco, but his broken wand backfired, sending him into a vomiting frenzy. Hermione, ever composed, didn't retaliate with violence. But the moment etched itself into her memory forever. It wasn't just a word, it was a scar, a reminder of how deep wizarding prejudice ran. Still, Hermione didn't let hatred stop her. Instead, she grew more determined to solve the mystery of the chamber and protect her fellow students. As attacks increased and fear gripped the school, the trio devised a bold plan. They would brew Polyjuice potion, an extremely advanced and dangerous magical concoction that would allow them to assume the forms of other students and interrogate Draco Malfoy to see if he was the heir of Slytherin. Brewing Polyjuice potion in secret was no small feat. It took a month to prepare, and Hermione insisted on doing it properly. She borrowed a restricted book from the library under false pretenses, navigated complex instructions, and coordinated everything from the disused girls' bathroom home to Moaning Myrtle, the ghost of a former Hogwarts student who had died under mysterious circumstances decades earlier. This episode was especially revealing. It showed Hermione's willingness to break rules, take risks, and embrace morally gray areas for the greater good. The same girl who once feared expulsion more than death was now stealing ingredients from Snape's private stores, lying to professors, and mastering illegal potions, all in pursuit of truth and justice. When the Polyjuice potion was finally ready, each member of the trio drank it, transforming into Crabbe, Goyle, and in Hermione's case, someone entirely unexpected. She had intended to turn into Millicent Bulstrode, but unknowingly used a hair from Millicent's cat. As a result, Hermione was partially transformed into a feline, a tail, whiskers, and fur to match. It was a disaster, and she had to spend weeks in the hospital wing, while Madame Pomfrey worked to reverse the effects. But Hermione's reaction wasn't embarrassment, it was frustration. Not at herself, but at being taken out of the fight. The Polyjuice mission, despite her setback, provided key information. Draco wasn't the heir. He didn't know who was opening the chamber. That left the mystery unsolved, but the trio was closer than ever. As the attacks continued, Hermione's determination only grew. Students were being petrified, frozen in place, unable to move or speak, as though turned to stone. She worried constantly for Harry, especially as whispers of his connection to the chamber grew louder. When it was revealed he could speak Parseltongue, the language of snakes, it only fueled suspicion that he might be the heir himself. But Hermione never once doubted him. Her final act before falling victim to the monster herself was the most quintessentially Hermione thing imaginable: research. While walking to the library one afternoon, she looked into a mirror to protect herself and was petrified. Clutched in her frozen hand was a torn page from a book, detailing a creature few had even heard of: the basilisk, a giant serpent whose gaze could kill. It was the answer, and Hermione had found it. Even in unconsciousness, she had armed her friends with the truth. After Hermione was attacked, Harry and Ron were devastated. Her absence left a void not just in their plans, but in their hearts. She had always been the planner, the logical one, the researcher who kept them grounded. They pressed on without her, but it was Hermione's brilliance that ultimately led to the discovery that the creature was indeed a basilisk traveling through Hogwarts plumbing. Her note proved the key to everything. It wasn't until weeks later, after Harry defeated the basilisk and destroyed the diary of Tom Riddle, that Hermione was revived using Mandrake restorative draught. She awoke in the hospital wing to cheers, hugs, and the sight of her two best friends, who had missed her more than they could say. Despite her long absence from the final moments of the mystery, Hermione's role was indispensable. She had uncovered the creature's identity, helped unravel the mystery of the attacks, and stood firm in the face of prejudice. And she did all of this while being targeted for her very identity. The second year at Hogwarts wasn't about grades or academic achievement. It was about resilience, about fighting back against the darkness, both literal and ideological, that threatened to consume the school. Hermione, once again, had proven that her brilliance wasn't just about books. It was about bravery, compassion, and the willingness to act, even when the cost was high. When the school year ended and the threat was vanquished, Hermione returned home with a deeper understanding of herself and the world she was now fully a part of, the world of witches, wizards, and bloodlines. But if her enemies had hoped to silence or intimidate her, they failed. Hermione Granger left her second year stronger than ever. By Hermione Granger's third year at Hogwarts, she had already established herself as the school's most brilliant student, one-third of a legendary trio, and someone who consistently rose to meet challenges most adults would cower from. But this year would be different. This year wasn't about ancient artifacts or bloodline prejudice. It was about fear, loyalty, justice, and time itself. The school year began under a cloud of tension. Sirius Black, a notorious mass murderer and the first ever to escape from Azkaban prison, was on the loose. The wizarding world was gripped with fear, believing he was hunting Harry Potter. Dementors, soul-sucking guards of Azkaban, were stationed at Hogwarts to protect the students, though their chilling presence had the opposite effect. For Hermione, the threat of Sirius Black wasn't just background noise, it was a puzzle, a mystery, begging to be solved. At the same time, Hermione had taken her academic ambition to new extremes. She had signed up for every possible subject, including some that occurred at the exact same time. Arithmancy, ancient runes, Muggle studies, care of magical creatures, divination, and more. Her friends were baffled. How was she attending classes that clearly overlapped? The answer would not be revealed until near the end of the year, but the truth was staggering. Hermione had been entrusted by Professor McGonagall and the Ministry of Magic with a time turner, a rare and strictly controlled magical device that allowed her to go back in time and attend multiple classes in a single day. This seemingly small detail spoke volumes. Not only had Hermione earned the trust of her professors at the highest level, but she was also shouldering an immense burden. The physical and mental toll of using the time turner was overwhelming. She was constantly exhausted, frequently anxious, and perpetually worried someone might notice her secret. Still, she bore it all in silence. To Hermione, education was worth the cost. The pursuit of knowledge wasn't optional, it was who she was. As classes progressed, Hermione began to lose patience with divination, particularly with Professor Trelawney, whose vague and overly theatrical predictions clashed with Hermione's logical mind. The final straw came when Trelawney once again predicted Harry's death and gave a particularly offensive evaluation of Hermione's lack of inner eye. Hermione stormed out of class and dropped the subject altogether, a rare moment where she chose self-respect over her usual academic discipline. Meanwhile, a new and beloved teacher entered the scene, Professor Remus Lupin, the new Defense Against the Dark Arts instructor. Hermione was immediately impressed by his calm demeanor, practical teaching style, and kindness. But something about him didn't add up. His mysterious absences, pale complexion, and fatigue caught Hermione's attention. Always the observer, she started connecting the dots. Then came Buckbeak, the proud and majestic hippogriff, introduced during Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures class. When Draco Malfoy foolishly disrespected the creature, he was injured, and his powerful father, Lucius Malfoy, used his influence to demand the creature's execution. Hermione was outraged. It was yet another injustice, another abuse of power by those who clung to privilege. She and Harry worked feverishly to build a case to save Buckbeak, researching appeals, arguing logic, and filing documents with an intensity few students could muster. But when the ministry upheld the execution order, it crushed her. Logic had failed against politics. As the year neared its climax, the mysteries deepened. Sirius Black had supposedly broken into Hogwarts multiple times, and a growing sense of unease followed Harry everywhere. Then, during a fateful night, Hermione's world turned upside down. She, Harry, and Ron discovered the truth. Sirius Black was not the villain the world believed him to be. He was Harry's godfather, framed by the real traitor, Peter Pettigrew, who had been hiding for years in the form of Ron's pet rat, Scabbers. The revelation shattered everything they thought they knew. For Hermione, it wasn't just about uncovering a lie. It was about confronting the fragility of truth in the wizarding world. Institutions had failed again. An innocent man had been imprisoned. A murderer had walked free. And the system that Hermione trusted to be fair and just had once more proven itself deeply flawed. As Sirius's capture loomed, and the truth threatened to be buried forever, Dumbledore gave Hermione permission to use her time turner not for education this time, but to save lives. Together, she and Harry traveled back 3 hours into the past, watching themselves from the shadows and carefully intervening at critical moments. It was Hermione who remembered to lure Lupin, now transformed into a werewolf, away from others. It was Hermione who led them to Buckbeak, allowing them to free the creature and set in motion Sirius's daring escape. Her calm, calculated planning saved 2 lives that night, Buckbeak's and Sirius Black's, and altered the course of magical history. Her use of the time turner under pressure, her ability to remain focused despite the mind-bending implications of time travel, and her loyalty to Harry were a masterclass in composure and brilliance. And yet, no one could know. To the outside world, Sirius had simply vanished. Buckbeak had fled. The system remained unchanged. But Hermione knew what she'd done. She had bent time itself to serve justice, and proven once again that she was more than just the smartest witch of her age. She was a force for truth in a world that desperately needed it. As the school year ended, she returned the time turner to the ministry. The stress had worn her thin, and she knew she couldn't keep sacrificing her well-being for academics. In a rare moment of self-care, Hermione dropped several subjects and returned to a more reasonable course load. It was a quiet but powerful decision. She was learning to balance ambition with sustainability and to define herself beyond grades. Third year was a turning point for Hermione. She discovered the limits of the law, the imperfections of authority, and the importance of acting when others won't. She had saved an innocent man, witnessed the cruelty of institutional failure, and helped write a new chapter in Harry's life, one where he had a family again, even if only in secret. But perhaps most importantly, Hermione had faced the future and the past, and found herself capable of changing both. Hermione Granger's 4th year at Hogwarts began with an air of excitement and mystery. The school was hosting the Triwizard tournament, a legendary magical competition not held for over a century. Students from Beauxbatons Academy and Durmstrang Institute arrived to great fanfare, and with them came a sense of global magic that thrilled Hermione. But beneath the festive atmosphere, a darker current stirred, one that would challenge Hermione not with monsters or spells, but with the most complicated force of all, emotion. Hermione had grown in confidence over the years, no longer just the eager first-year quoting Hogwarts, a history. She was still the top student in most of her classes, but she had also gained the poise and wisdom that comes from experience. Experiences like facing trolls, surviving time travel, and helping clear the name of Sirius Black. Still, nothing in her magical education had prepared her for the tangled web of emotions that this year would bring. When Harry Potter's name unexpectedly emerged from the Goblet of Fire, making him an unwilling fourth champion in the tournament. Hermione was among the first to stand by him. She knew Harry hadn't entered his name and trusted him implicitly. But Ron, caught between jealousy and hurt pride, turned on Harry. Their friendship fractured, creating a deep emotional rift in the trio. Hermione became the bridge between them. She supported Harry through endless media scrutiny, student gossip, and the enormous pressure of surviving the tournament's deadly tasks, while also trying to mend his friendship with Ron. For weeks, she bore the weight of that tension silently. She tried to focus on her studies, on helping Harry prepare, but the absence of unity between her best friends was like an open wound. This year also brought Hermione face to face with the brutal spotlight of celebrity culture. Rita Skeeter, the venomous journalist for the Daily Prophet, began targeting Harry and then Hermione. In her articles, Skeeter twisted the truth with flair, portraying Hermione as manipulative, falsely implying she was romantically involved with both Harry and Victor Krum, the famous Quidditch star from Durmstrang and one of the tournament champions. The reality was far more nuanced. Victor, impressed by Hermione's intelligence and calm, had taken a genuine interest in her. For the first time, Hermione was seen not just as a brilliant mind, but as someone worthy of admiration and affection. She was flattered and cautious, but ultimately agreed to attend the Yule Ball as Victor's date, unleashing a storm of reactions. Her arrival at the ball was a watershed moment. Dressed in periwinkle blue robes, with sleek hair and a calm grace, Hermione stunned everyone. It was a turning point, not because she had transformed into someone new, but because others were finally seeing her as she truly was. Not just the bookish girl with frizzy hair, but a young woman with depth, confidence, and strength. Ron, in particular, was caught off guard. He hadn't expected to feel jealous, but watching Hermione dance with Victor ignited feelings he hadn't acknowledged. Their friendship suffered another strain that night, as Ron lashed out in a mix of confusion and insecurity. Hermione, hurt and furious, called him out for his immaturity. "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." It was one of Hermione's most emotionally raw moments, a glimpse into her vulnerability and her desire to be valued, not just for her intellect, but for who she was. Her feelings weren't easily expressed, and like much of what she did, they simmered beneath the surface. But when she spoke up, it was with honesty and fire. Outside of the drama of teenage relationships, Hermione's activism also reached new heights this year. After witnessing the conditions of house elves working in the Hogwarts kitchens unpaid, overworked, and largely invisible, Hermione founded SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. It was an idealistic, ambitious movement that most students mocked or ignored, but Hermione remained undeterred. She knitted hats and socks for the elves, distributed badges, and tried to educate her peers about justice for magical creatures. Her efforts were noble, though perhaps naive. What many saw as an annoying obsession was actually Hermione's growing awareness of systemic inequality in the magical world. She had seen too much injustice, pure-blood supremacy, corrupt institutions, wrongful imprisonment to stay silent. Spew was her way of doing something. It wasn't perfect, but it mattered. It was the seed of what would one day blossom into a career devoted to social reform. As the Triwizard tournament continued, the danger grew. Harry faced dragons, rescued hostages from the depths of the Black Lake, and ultimately entered the maze, a massive, enchanted labyrinth designed to test champions' courage, intelligence, and resolve. Hermione couldn't go with him, but her presence was felt in every step. She had helped Harry strategize, coached him, studied magical creatures, and given him the emotional support he needed to believe in himself. Then, the unthinkable happened. Harry and Cedric Diggory touched the Triwizard Cup together and were transported away. Minutes later, Harry returned wounded, shaken, and cradling Cedric's lifeless body. The tournament was over, but so was any illusion of safety. Lord Voldemort had returned. The Ministry denied it. The Daily Prophet smeared Harry's name, but Hermione didn't waver. She believed him without hesitation. She stood by him as most of the world turned away. This moment marked a profound shift. The threat was no longer distant. The fight was no longer hypothetical. It was real, and Hermione Granger was ready. Her fourth year was transformative. It was a year of emotional turmoil, public scrutiny, ideological awakening, and quiet strength. She defended her friends, stood up for justice, and navigated the storm of adolescence with her head held high. More than ever, it became clear that Hermione wasn't just the smartest student at Hogwarts, she was its moral compass. And though the year had ended in tragedy, something had solidified: Hermione's resolve. The world was changing, darkness was rising again, and she would not stand by. She would read, fight, plan, and protect. Because friendship, to Hermione, wasn't a side note, it was the foundation of everything worth saving. Hermione Granger entered her fifth year at Hogwarts, under the darkest cloud the school had yet known. Cedric Diggory was dead. Voldemort had returned. And yet the wizarding world was in denial. Rather than unite against a common threat, the Ministry of Magic doubled down on suppression, propaganda, and fear. For Hermione, a student who had spent years believing in logic, law, and institutional order, this was the year that shattered illusions. But it was also the year she found her voice not just as a student, but as a true leader in the resistance against tyranny. The Ministry's denial of Voldemort's return extended beyond newspapers and whispers. It reached into the very walls of Hogwarts with the appointment of Dolores Umbridge as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and later, Hogwarts High Inquisitor. A cruel, smug bureaucrat in pink, Umbridge wasn't interested in teaching defense. Her goal was control, silencing dissent, rewriting history, and punishing anyone who dared question authority. From the start, Hermione saw through her. While many students rolled their eyes at Umbridge's nonsense or tried to stay under the radar, Hermione was alarmed. She had always believed in rules, but Umbridge represented rules twisted for oppression. This wasn't order, it was authoritarianism, and Hermione would not stand for it. She argued back in class, challenged Umbridge's lies, and supported Harry when he spoke out about Voldemort's return. And when it became clear that Umbridge had no intention of preparing students for real threats, Hermione took the boldest step of her school career so far. She helped form Dumbledore's army. It was Hermione's idea, not Harry's, not Ron's. It was Hermione who organized the meeting at the Hog's Head Inn, gathered names, coordinated communication, and created the magical contract that bound all members to secrecy. The idea of a student-led resistance group practicing real defensive magic was revolutionary and dangerous. But Hermione was calm and methodical. She chose the name Dumbledore's Army not just to honor their mentor, but to subtly challenge the Ministry itself. If they feared Dumbledore leading an army, fine, let them. Meetings took place in the Room of Requirement, a hidden space that appeared only when someone needed it. Under Harry's instruction, the DA learned spells far beyond their curriculum: Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Patronus charms. But Hermione was the architect. She created the communication system, maintained the roster, ensured every session was safe and productive. She was building more than a club. She was building a resistance movement from the ground up, and she wasn't done. This was also the year Hermione showed her cunning side. When Rita Skeeter, the disgraced journalist, re-emerged, Hermione saw an opportunity. She blackmailed Rita into writing the truth for The Quibbler, an eccentric magazine edited by Luna Lovegood's father. The article was the first public account of Harry's story at the end of the Triwizard tournament, and it spread like wildfire. Hermione had found a way around the Ministry's censorship by weaponizing the truth. But resistance came at a price. As Umbridge tightened her grip on Hogwarts, She instituted brutal punishments. Students were tortured with cursed quills. Clubs were banned. The inquisitorial squad students, given power to enforce her rules, terrorized others. Hermione faced detentions, threats, and surveillance. Yet she remained composed, even as friends and classmates buckled under pressure. One of Hermione's most brilliant acts of the year was a trap. Knowing that Umbridge wanted an excuse to catch Dumbledore and seize power, Hermione fed false information to a student she knew would betray them, Marietta Edgecombe. When Marietta attempted to expose the DA, the magical contract Hermione had created struck back. The word sneak appeared across her face in angry boils. It was a ruthless move, but effective. Hermione had learned the stakes, and she was no longer playing nice. When Dumbledore took the fall for the DA and fled the school, Umbridge became headmistress. Fear gripped the halls, but Hermione pressed on. She refused to let Hogwarts become a training ground for obedience. Her resolve only deepened when Hagrid's half-giant brother Grop arrived and Professor Trelawney was nearly thrown out into the street. Hermione fought for their dignity, even as the system continued to fail them. The year reached its climax when Harry, convinced that Sirius Black was in danger at the Ministry of Magic, decided to act. Hermione, skeptical of the vision's authenticity, tried to reason with him. Her voice, always grounded in caution and rationality, was one of the few trying to prevent disaster. But in the end, she chose loyalty over logic and went with him because that's who she was. Her friends came first. The battle at the Department of Mysteries was unlike anything they had faced. The DA members, still just students, found themselves fighting Death Eaters in a desperate attempt to survive. Hermione held her own, dueling fiercely, showing that her spells weren't just textbook perfect, they were battle-ready. But she wasn't invincible. She was hit by a curse from Antonin Dolohov, leaving her unconscious and seriously injured. For Harry, seeing Hermione fall was a terrifying reminder of how real the war had become. In the aftermath, Sirius Black was dead. The prophecy had been revealed, and the wizarding world could no longer deny Voldemort's return. Dumbledore resumed his role at Hogwarts, and Umbridge was unceremoniously removed. But the cost had been high. Hermione had nearly died. The DA had been exposed, and the innocence of youth was shattered. Yet through it all, Hermione emerged stronger. She had led a resistance within the walls of a crumbling institution, protected her friends, subverted a tyrant, and used truth as a weapon. She was no longer just reacting to injustice, she was dismantling it. Not with violence, but with strategy, foresight, and unyielding belief in what was right. This year marked a turning point. Hermione Granger was no longer the student answering questions in class. She was now a general in a war most hadn't even realized had begun, and she was just getting started. In the war for the soul of Hogwarts, Dolores Umbridge was a tyrant, wearing the disguise of civility, and Hermione Granger became one of the few bold enough to challenge her. While the rise of Lord Voldemort loomed ominously in the shadows, the fifth year of Hermione's time at Hogwarts became a battle on a different front, a confrontation between student agency and institutional oppression. It was during this time that Hermione's brilliance and strategic mind reached a new level of importance, especially through the creation and leadership of Dumbledore's army. Though it was touched on before, Dumbledore's army wasn't just a rebellious after-school activity, it was Hermione's defiant response to a corrupted authority system. And her ability to recognize injustice cloaked in rules is what truly marked her growth. When Umbridge arrived at Hogwarts, she came as a representative of the Ministry of Magic, and immediately set out to establish control through condescending smiles, manipulative language, and an iron will. She insisted that the return of Voldemort was a lie, banned practical defense against the dark arts instruction, and introduced educational decrees that choked the freedom out of the school inch by inch. Hermione, always one to respect structure, was forced to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes the system itself becomes the problem. The decision to create the DA was Hermione's turning point. Up until now, she had worked within the boundaries of school life, pushing limits, but still respecting them. But Umbridge represented something darker, a regime using fear and misinformation to maintain power. And so, Hermione broke the rules, not for mischief or even survival, but for principle. She saw that the students of Hogwarts were being left defenseless against real threats, and she stepped into the void the adults refused to fill. Organizing the DA was no small feat. It took meticulous planning, magical contracts, and constant risk. Hermione charmed a galleon coin for each member, enchanted to update with meeting times and act as a communication device. More impressively, she hexed the parchment everyone signed so that anyone who betrayed the group's secrecy would suffer immediate retribution. This wasn't paranoia, it was precaution. And it worked. Even Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal, coerced by her mother in the ministry, was met with swift magical justice. Her face was cursed with the word sneak, branding her treachery for all to see. The DA wasn't just a club, it was a movement. Hermione wasn't the teacher, that was Harry's role, but she was its foundation. She recruited, organized, and protected the group. She created safe spaces where students could learn real defense magic, helping them take control of their own fates in a time when the adults around them seemed powerless. But Umbridge's assault on Hogwarts extended far beyond the classroom. She abolished Quidditch privileges, silenced dissenters, and established the Inquisitorial Squad, empowering students like Draco Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle to punish their peers under the guise of school discipline. When Fred and George Weasley fought back with firecrackers and chaos, Hermione didn't join the spectacle, but she admired it. Still, Hermione's rebellion wasn't fueled by anger. It was deliberate. While the Weasley twins went out in a blaze of defiance, Hermione operated in the shadows, sabotaging from within. Her greatest act of subversion, however, came when Harry received a false vision from Voldemort, a fabricated scene showing Sirius Black being tortured in the Department of Mysteries. Hermione, always cautious, warned Harry not to act rashly. Her instinct told her it might be a trap. She was right. But Harry's urgency and emotional vulnerability pushed them forward. When the group was caught attempting to use the Flu network to reach the Ministry, Hermione once again demonstrated her ability to think under pressure. When Umbridge threatened to use the Cruciatus curse on Harry, Hermione quickly concocted a believable lie, that Dumbledore had hidden a powerful weapon in the Forbidden Forest. She lured Umbridge into the woods, straight into the territory of the Centaur's creatures Umbridge had previously insulted and discriminated against. It was a brilliant move. Hermione knew the Centaur's hatred of Umbridge's bigotry would be her undoing, and she was right. The Centaurs took Umbridge away, ending her reign of terror with poetic justice. Hermione had struck a blow for every student who had been silenced, punished, or oppressed under her rule. From there, the story turned serious. The DA members traveled to the Ministry of Magic, where they battled Death Eaters in the Hall of Prophecies. Though still students, their training under Harry and Hermione's structured planning allowed them to hold their own against far more experienced adversaries. Hermione, as always, fought fiercely, casting spell after spell, protecting her friends until she was struck by a nonverbal curse from Antonin Dolohov. Gravely injured and knocked unconscious, she was removed from the rest of the battle. And yet, her influence lingered. The very existence of the DA, this secret, student-led network of magical resistance, was a direct result of her vision, her determination, and her belief that Hogwarts students could be more than bystanders. When the dust settled, the cost was heavy. Sirius Black was dead. Voldemort's return was undeniable. The DA was exposed, but Hermione's role in those events had changed everything. She had proven that resistance wasn't just for Aurors and Order members. It could begin in classrooms, in whispered meetings, in secret rooms hidden behind stone walls. It could begin with students who were willing to take risks for truth, justice, and one another. Hermione Granger's legacy that year was clear. She had lit the spark of rebellion. She had stood up not just to Umbridge, but to a system that preferred silence over truth. And she had done it all not with brute force, but with intellect, empathy, and sheer force of will. She wasn't just the cleverest witch in the school. She was a revolutionary, a strategist, a fighter, and above all, a protector of those who couldn't protect themselves. For Hermione Granger, the summer following her 5th year was marked by recovery both physical and emotional. The events at the Department of Mysteries had left deep scars. The revelation of the prophecy, the death of Sirius Black, and the harsh awakening that the Second Wizarding War had truly begun. Hermione had faced many dangers before, but never such a personal and devastating loss. And though it was Harry who had lost a godfather, Hermione, ever empathetic, carried the weight alongside him. 16 years old and no longer a child, Hermione entered her 6th year at Hogwarts more resolved than ever. The stakes had shifted. Gone were the days of schoolyard rivalries and quibbling over homework. The world outside the castle walls was changing fast, and within it, so was she. But with this change came new complexities, some found in battle, and some in the fragile territory of human emotion. The trio's bond had deepened following the events of the Department of Mysteries. Hermione, Ron, and Harry had bled together, fought together, and survived together. But their paths were also beginning to diverge in subtle ways, especially as emotions long buried began to rise to the surface. Throughout the year, Hermione's relationship with Ron Weasley began to shift. Their constant bickering had always hinted at something unspoken, frustration laced with affection, sarcasm as a shield for deeper feelings. But now, with their lives constantly under threat, those feelings became harder to ignore. Ron began to date Lavender Brown, a relationship driven more by impulse than compatibility, and Hermione struggled to hide her heartbreak. For someone so composed in battle and in academics, love was a battlefield she hadn't yet mastered. She attempted to mask her pain with sarcasm and silence, retreating into study and pretending not to care. But when Ron was nearly killed by a poisoned bottle of mead, an attack meant for Dumbledore, Hermione's walls crumbled. Her grief and fear poured out beside his hospital bed. It was one of the most emotionally raw moments in her journey. Not a duel, not a spell, but the quiet terror of almost losing someone she loved. Yet even in the midst of this emotional turmoil, Hermione remained the voice of reason and resistance. With Voldemort's followers growing bolder, Hogwarts became a microcosm of the larger war. Draco Malfoy was acting suspicious, sneaking around the castle, growing paler by the day. Professor Snape had taken the mysterious unbreakable vow. Strange events, cursed necklaces, poisoned drinks suggested something sinister was coming. While Harry grew more obsessed with Draco, Hermione balanced caution with logic. She didn't dismiss his concerns outright, but she challenged him to consider alternatives, to think critically. Her instinct was always to seek the whole truth, even when others were clouded by emotion. This year, she also assisted Harry in one of the most important pursuits of the war, retrieving the memories of Professor Slughorn, who had once discussed Horcruxes with a young Tom Riddle. Hermione helped Harry strategize, offering support as he tried to coax the memory out. Though she didn't directly participate in the eventual retrieval, her insight and encouragement played a crucial role in getting Harry across the finish line. Hermione's strengths weren't always flashy. She wasn't the chosen one. She wasn't the best duelist, but she was the anchor, the steady hand that kept her friends from drifting too far into recklessness. She was the planner, the researcher, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while others ran headlong into danger. And once again, that planning was needed most during a night that would change the course of the war. Dumbledore, away from the castle with Harry on a secret mission, had left Hogwarts vulnerable. Death Eaters, smuggled in through a repaired vanishing cabinet, launched an attack from within. In the chaos, Dumbledore was murdered atop the astronomy tower by none other than Severus Snape, the very professor Hermione had always respected for his brilliance, despite his cruelty. The news shattered the school. Dumbledore had been a pillar of light in a darkening world, and his death felt like the collapse of a shield that had protected them all. Hermione, who had survived countless dangers and seen horrors beyond her years, now faced a school and a world in mourning. But she didn't spiral. She didn't wallow. She regrouped. She knew what had to be done. As Harry vowed to hunt down Voldemort's Horcruxes and finish what Dumbledore started, Hermione didn't hesitate. She told him that she and Ron would go with him no matter the cost. In private, she began preparing. She obliviated her parents, sending them to Australia to protect them from potential Death Eater retaliation. It was a choice that tore at her soul. Hermione loved her parents dearly, but she erased herself from their lives to keep them safe. No one told her to. No one forced her. She made the decision quietly, alone. That act, so selfless, so painful, spoke volumes. In many ways, it was her greatest sacrifice. In the wake of the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, Hogwarts was no longer a sanctuary. The trio would not return for their 7th year. Instead, they would go underground into the wild, into war. But the foundations of that journey were laid here. In Hermione's research, her resilience, and her unshakable loyalty. She had endured prejudice, betrayal, and heartbreak. She had seen friends fall, mentors murdered, and truths hidden behind lies. Yet through it all, Hermione Granger remained constant. Not because she was untouched by the world's cruelty, but because she refused to be broken by it. And as the wizarding world teetered on the edge of darkness, she was no longer just a brilliant student or Harry Potter's best friend. She was the heart of the resistance. When the sun rose on the wizarding world after the death of Albus Dumbledore, everything had changed. The barrier between safety and war was gone. Voldemort's return was no longer a secret. The Ministry of Magic was being infiltrated. Hogwarts had become a shell of its former self, and the wizarding world was teetering on collapse. In the face of all this darkness, 3 young wizards made the unlikeliest of vows to find and destroy the secret to Voldemort's immortality, his Horcruxes. At the heart of that trio stood Hermione Granger, whose role would now become even more crucial than ever before. If Harry Potter was the heart of the mission, and Ron Weasley its loyalty, Hermione was its mind, its planner, and its strategist. Without her, the Horcrux hunt wouldn't have lasted a week. Before the hunt even began, Hermione had made the most painful decision of her life. She obliviated her parents' memories, giving them new identities and sending them to Australia for their safety. It was a silent, solitary act of sacrifice, one she didn't brag about, didn't cry over publicly, but it defined who she was. Hermione loved deeply, but she also understood the stakes. To protect the people she loved, she was willing to erase herself from their lives entirely. Her preparations didn't stop there. Anticipating the dangers ahead, Hermione enchanted her beaded handbag with an undetectable extension charm, allowing it to hold an entire library's worth of supplies, books, clothing, and survival tools in a single small pouch. This tiny bag, worn casually over her shoulder, would prove to be their lifeline, containing everything from tents to healing potions to the books that would help them understand how to destroy Horcruxes. As the trio skipped their 7th year at Hogwarts, Hermione committed fully to a mission that had no clear end, no clear plan, and no guarantee of survival. From the moment they left Bill and Fleur's wedding, ambushed by Death Eaters and forced to go on the run, Hermione was in action. She apparated them to safety, cast protective enchantments nightly, and helped build the magical routines that would keep them hidden across countless remote locations. The hunt was long, cold, and filled with hardship. Unlike past adventures, this was not a quest filled with constant clues or guidance. There were stretches of time when the trio had no leads, no hope, and no idea where the next Horcrux might be. They moved from forest to forest, mountain to field, living in fear of being discovered, doubting their mission, and even beginning to question each other. The greatest trial of Hermione's resolve came not from outside enemies, but from within her own group. The Horcrux locket, worn by each member of the trio in turn, had a toxic effect on the wearer. It amplified fear, doubt, and anger, driving them toward paranoia and resentment. For Ron, already struggling with feelings of inadequacy and frustration, it became unbearable. He lashed out, and in a moment of anger and confusion, left. The betrayal devastated Hermione. While Harry reacted with anger and loss, Hermione broke silently. She cried herself to sleep, clutched Ron's abandoned jacket, and retreated inward, but she never gave up. She stayed with Harry. She encouraged him. She pushed the mission forward, even when the path was unclear. This was the deepest emotional wound. She had suffered abandonment by someone she trusted and loved. But she didn't let it stop her. Together, she and Harry visited Godric's Hollow, hoping for answers in the place where it all began. There, they were attacked by Nagini, Voldemort's snake, and one of his Horcruxes, barely escaping with their lives. The encounter left Harry's wand broken, but Hermione had saved his life. Again, eventually, the locket was destroyed. Ron returned, repentant, and saved Harry from drowning in a frozen lake. Though Hermione was furious at first, she ultimately forgave him. Their bond, tempered by pain and separation, had become unbreakable. And now, with the trio reunited, they pursued the next Horcrux with renewed strength. Their next destination was Xenophilius Lovegood, Luna's eccentric father, who spoke to them about the mysterious Deathly Hallows, 3 legendary objects said to grant mastery over death. Hermione was skeptical. She didn't like mythology or half-truths. She wanted facts, and the idea of magical objects surpassing the laws of nature clashed with everything she believed. Still, she kept an open mind, because this journey had taught her that even the most ridiculous rumors could hold a kernel of truth. Then came the darkest chapter of their journey, Malfoy Manor. Captured by Snatchers and taken to the Death Eaters, Hermione found herself in enemy hands. She was tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange, who carved the word Mudblood into her arm and used the Cruciatus Curse in an attempt to extract information. Despite the unbearable pain, Hermione never broke. She protected the mission, lied convincingly, and bought time for Dobby to arrive and stage a daring rescue. Her survival of that ordeal, both physically and emotionally, is a testament to her extraordinary strength. While her friends healed their bruises, Hermione carried a deeper wound. The reminder of her blood status, scarred into her skin by hate, never left her, but neither did it break her spirit. After their escape, they took refuge at Shell Cottage, where Hermione helped formulate the plan to break into Gringotts Bank, where another Horcrux was hidden. She even disguised herself as Bellatrix, mastering her voice and mannerisms to gain entry into the vaults. It was one of the most dangerous infiltrations of the war, and it only succeeded thanks to Hermione's precision and nerve. They escaped Gringotts on the back of a dragon, and with that, the trio had done the impossible. They had destroyed multiple Horcruxes, uncovered ancient secrets, and survived countless brushes with death. But Hermione never once saw herself as the hero. She never sought recognition. Her focus was always on the mission, on Harry, on making sure they finished what Dumbledore started. As the hunt reached its final chapter and they prepared to return to Hogwarts for the final battle, Hermione had already proven herself more than anyone ever expected of a schoolgirl. She wasn't just brilliant. She was indomitable. She had endured torture without breaking, carried the weight of strategy and planning, and remained grounded, even as the world crumbled around her. The shadows had grown long, but Hermione Granger never stopped shining. And now, with war looming on the horizon and Voldemort closing in, she stood ready not just to fight, but to finish what they had started. The search for Horcruxes was never meant to be easy, but for Hermione Granger, the journey took on a particularly brutal weight during the months lost in the wilderness. These were not the grand, action-filled quests one might expect of heroes, but long, grueling stretches of uncertainty, hunger, isolation, and fear. The trio's time in the forests of Britain was, in many ways, the emotional crucible that would forge Hermione into something greater than even she could have imagined, not just a witch of extraordinary intellect, but a warrior of remarkable resilience. Following the chaos at Bill and Fleur's wedding and the narrow escape from Death Eater ambushes, Hermione took charge. When Harry hesitated, she acted. When Ron panicked, she reasoned. With no teachers, no safe havens, and no guidance, she became their planner, healer, and protector. Every night, she cast powerful protective enchantments around their makeshift camps. Muffliato, Protego Totalum, Cave Inimicum, charms that cloaked them from detection, that allowed them to sleep if only lightly without fear of being caught in the night. But as the weeks turned into months, and one hiding spot bled into the next, it became clear that this mission would not be won on spells alone. They were hungry, dirty, and losing hope. The Horcrux locket, once retrieved, turned out to be more than a cursed object. It was a psychic poison. Its dark magic seeped into the mind of whoever wore it, amplifying insecurities, driving wedges between friends, and turning every frustration into a festering wound. Hermione, ever cautious, insisted they take turns wearing it, never for too long. She monitored everyone's moods, tried to mediate rising tempers, and clung to structure and logic as the last threads of stability. But even she wasn't immune to the toll the locket took. Her confidence wavered, her patience frayed, and slowly, the bond between the trio began to fracture. Ron, long overshadowed by both Harry and Hermione, was especially vulnerable to the locket's corrosive influence. He felt helpless, underappreciated, and frustrated at their lack of progress. Food was scarce, leads were few, and every day they seemed to drift further from a solution. The whispers in the locket fed his doubts. Harry doesn't need you. Hermione's chosen him. You're just the spare. When Ron finally snapped, it was sudden, devastating, and utterly heartbreaking. Accusing Hermione of favoring Harry, of knowing too much and sharing too little, he lashed out in a fury of pain and confusion. And then he left disapparating into the night, leaving Hermione and Harry stunned, alone, and shattered. Hermione's response was quiet but crushing. She didn't scream, she didn't cry in front of Harry. But later, when they were alone in their tent, she broke down. The girl who had stood against giants, Death Eaters, and torture, now sat in the cold, clutching Ron's discarded jacket, sobbing into it in silence. She didn't just lose a friend, she lost a piece of her heart. But she never suggested abandoning the mission. Even in grief, Hermione carried on. Her relationship with Harry during this time became one of silent solidarity. He too was wounded emotionally, spiritually, but Hermione kept him focused. She read constantly, cross-referencing legends and magical theory. She mapped their journey through the Forest of Dean, scanning for magical traces, searching for any clue, any fragment that might lead to another Horcrux. Then came the moment of serendipity. Harry followed a mysterious silver doe, Patronus, to a frozen lake and saw Godric Gryffindor's sword glinting beneath the ice, one of the few weapons capable of destroying a Horcrux. But as he dove in to retrieve it, the locket around his neck fought back, trying to drown him, and then Ron returned. He pulled Harry from the lake, sword in hand, and destroyed the Horcrux in an explosive moment of catharsis. But before Ron could rejoin them fully, there was Hermione waiting, furious. Her voice cracked not just with anger, but with betrayal. She screamed at him, demanded to know why he'd left, how he could do that to them. To her, it was more than just wounded pride. It was raw emotion, the kind of pain only someone truly loved could cause. But Ron's return also marked a turning point. They were whole again, though not unchanged. The forest had tested them in ways that spells never could. And from those trials, their bond was reforged stronger than before. Still, Hermione never let herself become complacent. She focused on strategy. She was the one who deciphered the tale of the three brothers, recognizing its connection to the Deathly Hallows. Though skeptical of myths, she cataloged every relevant symbol, detail, and name. She was the first to notice the symbol of the Hallows in the tales of Beedle the Bard, and while she didn't embrace it as gospel, she understood its significance. For Hermione, knowledge was not just power, it was armor. Yet even amidst all this tension, there were rare, fleeting moments of light. At one point in their journey, she and Harry shared a slow dance in the dim warmth of their tent. It wasn't romantic, it was an attempt to soothe aching hearts. Two friends, broken and lost, trying to find hope in music. Hermione's face softened. For just a moment, she smiled. It was a reminder that joy, no matter how fleeting, still had a place, even in war. Their final days in the forest culminated in the capture. While traveling, the trio was ambushed by Snatcher's bounty hunters working for the Ministry. In a moment of clarity and instinct, Hermione used a powerful stinging hex on Harry's face, disfiguring him to keep his identity hidden. She claimed they were Muggle-borns trying to flee persecution. It nearly worked until they were recognized and taken to Malfoy Manor. Here, Hermione's strength was tested like never before. Bellatrix Lestrange, suspecting that they had broken into her Gringotts vault, subjected Hermione to prolonged and brutal torture, carving mudblood into her arm, screaming curses, demanding answers. And through it all, Hermione did not break. She lied convincingly, protecting the mission, Harry, Ron, and the truth. Even in agony, she maintained control. Her screams echoed through the manor, but her spirit never wavered. It was one of the most horrifying scenes in the entire saga, not because of magic, but because of what it revealed about both darkness and resilience. Eventually, with the help of Dobby the house elf, they escaped. Hermione was wounded, shaken, but alive. She had survived the worst cruelty Voldemort's followers had to offer, and emerged more determined than ever. The forest had taken much from her, her comfort, her safety, her trust. But it had given her something too, the absolute certainty that the fight was worth it. She had seen what they were up against, and she was not afraid. Not anymore. For Hermione Granger, the escape from Malfoy Manor marked a turning point not just in the trio's mission, but in the personal cost she would be forced to pay in the war against Voldemort. Torture, imprisonment, and fear had long been a backdrop to her journey, but now the lines between battle and brutality had been erased. Malfoy Manor was not just a prison, it was a crucible. And inside it, Hermione faced the kind of horror that would leave invisible scars for the rest of her life. Captured by Snatchers and brought to the manor alongside Harry, Ron, Dean, Luna, Griphook, and the wandmaker Ollivander, Hermione was quickly singled out by Bellatrix Lestrange. The sadistic Death Eater recognized the sword of Godric Gryffindor among their possessions and suspected they had broken into her Gringotts vault, which held another Horcrux. But while Bellatrix's panic was grounded in fear, it manifested as violence. Hermione was dragged away from the others and subjected to prolonged and calculated torture. Bellatrix wasn't just trying to hurt her, she was trying to extract information through pain. Her Cruciatus curses were relentless, and her twisted sense of pride as a pureblood made Hermione a Muggle-born, a target for her deepest hatred. In a horrific act of psychological warfare, Bellatrix carved the word mudblood into Hermione's arm using her knife, embedding bigotry into her very flesh. For someone who had spent her entire life trying to prove that knowledge, discipline, and compassion mattered more than blood, it was a dehumanizing attack on everything Hermione stood for. But through it all, Hermione never broke. She cried, she screamed, she suffered, but she refused to say what Bellatrix wanted to hear. She claimed the sword was a fake. She lied convincingly through her sobs, even as she was bleeding and writhing in pain. Her loyalty to Harry and the mission never wavered. She knew that revealing the truth wouldn't just endanger them, it would destroy any hope of defeating Voldemort. In another room, Harry and Ron listened to her screams, helpless and frantic. Ron, in particular, was driven nearly mad by the sound of her suffering. The emotional stakes of their relationship had always been simmering beneath the surface, but at Malfoy Manor, they erupted into something more visceral. His love for her became undeniable. This wasn't teenage awkwardness anymore, it was devotion, raw and desperate. The rescue came in the form of the unlikeliest hero, Dobby, the house elf. With stealth and bravery, Dobby helped them disarm the Death Eaters, recover their wands, and flee the manor via disapparition. But as they vanished, Bellatrix threw a knife, and it struck Dobby in the chest. Hermione, bloodied and weak, watched as Dobby died in Harry's arms. She had just survived hours of agony. Her voice was hoarse, her skin scarred, her magic drained, but it was Dobby's death that broke something in her. The selfless little elf who had saved her from further torture was now lying lifeless in the sand. Her grief was quiet, choked sobs, trembling hands, but it was absolute. They buried Dobby by hand, without magic, on a quiet beach outside Shell Cottage. Harry carved a headstone. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. Hermione wept, but she didn't fall apart. While recovering at Shell Cottage, Hermione continued to strategize. Her injuries were severe, both magical and physical, but she channeled her energy into planning their next move, infiltrating Gringotts Bank to retrieve another Horcrux. The only way in would be through Bellatrix's vault, and Hermione, already haunted by her face, her voice, her cruelty, would have to impersonate her. The plan was insane. Gringotts was one of the most secure locations in the magical world. Breaking into it was unthinkable, but Hermione, as always, leaned into preparation. She studied Bellatrix's walk, her tone, her vocabulary. She forced herself to become the very woman who had tortured her. It was the ultimate mental test, pretending to be her abuser in order to bring down the system she represented. The Polyjuice potion transformed Hermione's body, but her discomfort was palpable. Every step she took in Bellatrix's heels, every cruel word she mimicked, reminded her of that night. Her acting was flawless to the goblins and Death Eaters, but to Ron and Harry, the strain behind her eyes told the real story. Inside the vault, the Horcrux Helga Hufflepuff's cup was protected by a Gemino curse, which caused everything they touched to multiply exponentially. Trapped inside a vault rapidly filling with burning, multiplying treasure, Hermione kept her head. She screamed instructions, cast spells, and helped them escape with the Horcrux, but just barely. The trio was forced to flee on the back of a Ukrainian iron-bellied dragon, bursting through the ceiling of Gringotts and crashing through Diagon Alley. It was a chaotic, dangerous escape, but it worked. And it only worked because Hermione had endured more pain and pressure than anyone could imagine. Even in the aftermath, she showed her resilience. She had been carved open, physically and emotionally, by Bellatrix. She had risked her life, impersonating her. And yet, she was already focused on the final goal, Hogwarts. That was where the last battle would begin. Hermione Granger's escape from Malfoy Manor wasn't just a rescue. It was a transformation. She had stared down the worst of Voldemort's followers. She had resisted torture, endured hate, and watched a friend die in her arms. And through it all, she kept going. Not because she was unfeeling, but because she believed that some things were worth suffering for. Justice, freedom, love. Hermione had always fought with her mind. But now, she had proven that she could also fight with her heart, her will, and her unwavering belief in what was right. The pain she endured would never fully heal, but she carried it forward not as a weakness, but as armor. Every scar was a reminder that she had survived, and that the war was not over. Not yet. By the time Hermione Granger returned to Hogwarts, she was no longer a student, she was a soldier. Gone were the school robes and neatly organized book bags. In their place stood a witch who had braved forests, curses, betrayals, and torture. Her hands had destroyed Horcruxes. Her mind had kept the mission alive. And now, as Lord Voldemort prepared to unleash his forces upon the last bastion of resistance, Hermione took her place not in the background, but at the very heart of the fight. The return to Hogwarts began with a whisper, a secret journey through the Hogshead Inn, led by Aberforth Dumbledore, brother of the late headmaster. Inside the inn's back room, Neville Longbottom, battered but defiant, welcomed the trio through a secret tunnel into the Room of Requirement, now transformed into a haven for the remaining students who had resisted the Death Eater's reign at Hogwarts. When Hermione emerged from the tunnel, her presence sparked a surge of hope. She was more than a peer now. She was a symbol. To those who had endured the Carrow's cruelty, who had watched Hogwarts become a prison, Hermione Granger was living proof that the fight was not over, that courage still had a voice, and that justice would not fade quietly into the night. But she didn't bask in the admiration. Hermione immediately focused on the task, finding and destroying the final Horcruxes. At this point in the journey, her role was as vital as Harry's. She didn't just support his mission, she enabled it. Her knowledge of spells, magical history, and enchantments remained unmatched. She became the strategist, the tactician, the one who asked the questions that needed answers. While Harry followed intuition, Hermione mapped the battlefield. The trio deduced that one of the final Horcruxes was Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem, hidden somewhere within the castle. Hermione's first instinct was to go to the library, to cross-reference legends and architectural diagrams. But time was against them. The school was already under siege. As the defenses of Hogwarts were raised, Hermione stood alongside the Order of the Phoenix and student rebels from Dumbledore's army, helping to coordinate defensive enchantments, barricades, and escape routes. She wasn't just fighting evil with spells, she was fighting it with order, with intellect, and with clarity. Then came the death toll. As the battle began and Voldemort's forces assaulted the school, the trio split up. Hermione and Ron raced to the Chamber of Secrets, a place she had only seen in drawings and heard about in whispered memories. Using Parseltongue learned from Harry, Ron opened the chamber, and together they retrieved a basilisk fang, one of the few weapons capable of destroying a Horcrux. Hermione herself destroyed Hufflepuff's cup, stabbing it with the fang in a moment of grim determination. A surge of dark energy exploded outward. The Horcrux screamed as if it were alive. But Hermione didn't flinch. She had grown accustomed to pain. Her resolve had never been stronger. It was there, in the heat of chaos, that something long gestating between Hermione and Ron finally ignited. As they prepared to return to battle, adrenaline and emotion surging through them, Ron made a sudden, impulsive suggestion about saving the house elves in the kitchens. Hermione, overwhelmed, kissed him for the first time. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. It wasn't candlelight and slow music. It was war, fire, survival. But it was real. A moment of vulnerability and love between two people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen one another anyway. From that moment forward, they fought as one. Back in the heart of the castle, the battle raged. Giants smashed through walls. Spells lit the night sky like fireworks. Death Eaters descended, And through it all, Hermione moved with unshakable focus. She stunned, shielded, protected, and advanced not with brute force, but with precise surgical magic. She wasn't reckless. She was measured, calculated, and tireless. Then came the deaths. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks. The cost of victory began to bleed through the walls. Friends, mentors, and heroes fell. Hermione didn't have time to grieve. Not yet. The final Horcrux remained the snake Nagini, always at Voldemort's side. As the trio reconnected with Harry's vision of Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, they returned to the castle just in time to witness Voldemort's final ultimatum. He demanded Harry surrender or watch everyone die. Harry did surrender, and Hermione, for a brief, agonizing moment, believed he was dead. The sight of Hagrid carrying Harry's limp body back into the courtyard shattered her. She collapsed into Ron's arms, choking on sobs. For all her intellect and strength, Hermione was still human. Harry wasn't just their leader, he was family. But it wasn't over. It never was. When Harry revealed he was still alive, Voldemort's illusion of control crumbled. And in the final charge, Hermione returned to the front lines. As Neville beheaded Nagini, destroying the final Horcrux, Hermione helped repel the last of the Death Eaters. She dueled with intensity, blocking spells, shielding students, and holding the line against the darkness. In the final confrontation, as Voldemort was vanquished by his own rebounding curse, Hermione was not the one to deal the final blow. But without her, there would have been no final blow at all. She had gathered the knowledge. She had planned the hunt. She had kept the mission alive through every near-death experience, every betrayal, every loss. When the smoke cleared and silence fell upon the ruined halls of Hogwarts, Hermione Granger stood among the survivors, wounded, bloodied, grieving, but victorious. She hadn't just fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. She had helped win it, not through prophecy or power, but through loyalty, love, and logic. She proved that brilliance is not arrogance, that knowledge is not weakness, and that compassion can be the strongest weapon of all. And in that ruined castle, amidst the broken stone and fading spells, Hermione Granger, Muggle-born, bookworm, warrior, had become one of the most important witches in the history of the wizarding world. When the final battle ended and the sun rose over the ruins of Hogwarts, the wizarding world stood on the precipice of a new age. Voldemort was dead. The Death Eaters had either fled, been captured, or fallen. The war was over, but peace, as always, came with a price. Amid the ash and blood, Hermione Granger had not only survived, she had helped rebuild a broken world. And though her days of dueling Death Eaters were over, her greatest work was only just beginning. Hermione's post-war path was defined not by fame or glory, but by purpose. She had never sought recognition for her heroism. What mattered to her was making things right. After the final wand had been dropped and the final curse lifted, Hermione began the quiet, deliberate work of healing a society fractured by bigotry, fear, and generational prejudice. But first, she returned to her roots. While Harry and Ron opted not to return to Hogwarts to complete their final year, Hermione made the difficult but deeply personal decision to go back. For her, education had always been sacred, a symbol of self-empowerment and truth. After years of studying between battlefields and forests, she reclaimed the classroom not out of obligation, but conviction. She took her NEWT, completed her studies, and left Hogwarts not only as a hero, but as one of the most brilliant witches of her generation, with both intellect and experience that no curriculum could have provided alone. But Hermione wasn't content to simply move on. Her next mission was perhaps even more radical than the Horcrux hunt: reform. She joined the Ministry of Magic, beginning her career in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, the very same institution that once ignored the rights of house elves and other non-human beings. It was the natural evolution of her spew activism. But now, with real authority, Hermione began pushing legislation and policy to protect magical creatures and ensure ethical treatment. For the first time in Ministry history, voices long silenced were being heard, and it was because Hermione refused to let them be ignored. Her reforms didn't stop there. She later transferred to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where she began rooting out the deeply embedded biases and inequalities that had allowed Voldemort's ideology to flourish in the first place. She fought for Muggle-born rights, stricter regulation of dark magic artifacts, and comprehensive education reforms in wizarding schools. Through these efforts, Hermione transformed from battlefield strategist into political changemaker. Meanwhile, her personal life blossomed in quiet parallel. Her relationship with Ron Weasley, forged in war and tested by time, matured into a partnership built on mutual respect, deep affection, and occasional playful bickering. The two eventually married, building a life grounded in loyalty and shared experience rather than fantasy. Hermione brought her logical precision and fierce passion to the relationship, while Ron grounded her with humor and heart. Together, they had two children, Rose and Hugo Weasley. As a mother, Hermione was both fiercely protective and endlessly supportive, ensuring her children inherited not just magical ability, but moral clarity. She was determined to raise them in a world free from the prejudices and fears that had once defined her own youth. But even with a family and a career, Hermione never stopped fighting for progress. At some point after the war, she took on one of the most significant positions in the entire wizarding world, Minister for Magic. While canon details about this vary depending on timeline interpretations, in the most widely accepted version of post-war lore, Hermione eventually rose to lead the entire magical government. As minister, she ushered in a golden era of transparency, tolerance, and reform. She used her intelligence and sense of justice to dismantle outdated systems, modernize wizarding laws, and ensure that future generations would never face the darkness that she and her friends had endured. Under her leadership, the ministry became a place of inclusion rather than oppression. Despite her demanding role, Hermione never lost touch with her core values. She continued to support Hogwarts, frequently visiting as a guest lecturer and mentor to students who, like her younger self, didn't quite fit into the traditional molds. She championed the rights of Muggle-borns, fought against the resurgence of blood status rhetoric, and ensured that Hogwarts remained a place where all witches and wizards, regardless of background, could thrive. Her friendship with Harry and Ron endured through every stage of life. They remained close, bound not just by shared memories, but by a deeper bond, something forged in fire and impossible to sever. The trio, once children sneaking around corridors with an invisibility cloak, had grown into leaders who shaped the world. Hermione also maintained a deep friendship with Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, and others who had fought alongside her. These relationships, grounded in mutual respect and resilience, became a kind of extended family, war-forged, but healed by time and love. Looking back on her journey, Hermione Granger's evolution is extraordinary. She began as a bushy-haired, overachieving 11-year-old, often dismissed as annoying, overly eager, or too clever for her own good. But beneath that precocious exterior was a heart full of courage and conviction. She never let rejection define her. She never let prejudice diminish her worth. And she never stopped believing that knowledge, when wielded with compassion, could change the world. And she proved it. From her first spell to her last battle, from Hogwarts corridors to ministry courtrooms, Hermione's legacy is not just one of intelligence, but of action. She didn't just memorize spells, she applied them to save lives. She didn't just fight dark magic, she dismantled the conditions that allowed it to grow. She didn't just survive the war, she helped build the peace. Even decades later, her name evokes admiration and awe, not just for what she did, but for how she did it. With grace, with brilliance, with unshakable empathy. And in a world that so often celebrates strength in its loudest, flashiest forms, Hermione Granger stands as a testament to another kind of power. The quiet, relentless strength of a girl who chose to do the right thing no matter the cost. In a series defined by chosen ones, ancient prophecies, and epic battles, Hermione Granger stands out not for being destined, but for choosing. She chose to be brave. She chose to stand up. She chose to fight not because she had to, but because it was right. And in that choice, she became something far more powerful than a prophecy could ever dictate. She became a symbol. More than a sidekick or a clever friend, Hermione represents the kind of hero we rarely see celebrated in fantasy. Her weapon was not brute force. It was intellect. Her power wasn't in lineage or legacy, but in her unshakable will to learn, to grow, and to do what others would not. From the moment she stepped into the Hogwarts Express, nervous but eager, armed only with books and boundless enthusiasm, Hermione was different. She didn't come from a magical family. She didn't grow up with stories of dragons or duels, but she adapted. She absorbed everything. And in doing so, she became more than just a student of magic. She became a master of it. But Hermione's greatness has never been about being the best with a wand or having the flashiest spell. Her magic was more subtle, more grounded. She brought logic to chaos, structure to spontaneity, caution to recklessness. And it was precisely this balance that allowed Harry and Ron to survive and ultimately succeed. Without her, the story wouldn't have lasted past their first year. Yet her legacy extends far beyond battle strategies and Horcrux destruction. What makes Hermione truly unforgettable is her conviction, her unrelenting moral compass, in a world that often tried to distort or erase it. Whether she was founding SPEW to fight for house elf rights, organizing Dumbledore's army, or standing up to both teachers and tyrants alike, Hermione consistently challenged a broken system. She saw injustice not as something to endure, but something to confront. And she did it without fanfare. In an age of snark and cynicism, Hermione dared to be sincere. She was mocked for raising her hand in class. She was insulted for being a mudblood. She was teased for her perfectionism, her know-it-all attitude, her earnestness. But Hermione never shrank herself to make others comfortable. She was proud of who she was, and that pride, in the face of relentless pushback, was revolutionary. She showed generations of readers, especially young girls, that being smart was not something to hide, that it was okay to speak up, to lead, to challenge. She was proof that kindness and brilliance are not mutually exclusive, that empathy and intellect, when combined, can shake the foundations of even the darkest systems. And she did all this without ever needing a spotlight. Hermione never sought glory. When praised, she often deflected it. When given power, she wielded it carefully. She didn't become Minister for Magic because she craved recognition. She did it because the job needed doing, and she was the most qualified person to do it. She understood that true leadership is measured not in titles, but in action. Her influence extends far beyond the fictional world of Harry Potter. In real life, Hermione Granger has inspired generations of students to raise their hands, question authority, and read one more chapter. She has become a cultural icon, a shorthand for intelligence, activism, and strength. Teachers refer to Hermione types in class. Activists reference her when fighting for the voiceless, and fans, particularly those from marginalized communities, see in her a mirror of their own journey through systems that weren't built with them in mind. For Muggle-born readers, Hermione's story resonates deeply. Her struggle to belong, her need to overperform, her constant push against elitist structures all reflect real-world issues that countless individuals face every day. And through Hermione, they find validation. They find hope. She is also a champion for bookworms, introverts, overachievers, those whose strengths aren't always loud or immediately visible. She gave space for quiet excellence, for moral courage, for the idea that being too much is never a flaw when the world needs exactly what you are. Even within the wizarding world's own mythology, Hermione's legacy endures. Every spell she mastered, every law she rewrote, every battle she won, it all speaks to the larger truth that heroism isn't exclusive to those born great. It can also belong to those who prepare, who study, who feel deeply, and who refuse to look away when others are suffering. She didn't have to be chosen. She chose herself. And in that choice, she inspired others to do the same. Hermione's story reminds us that progress is not always swift or clean. It's found in the grind, the hard decisions, the emotional labor, the conversations where no one claps. She reminds us that intelligence is not elitism, that compassion is not weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful kind of magic is the refusal to give up. So what is Hermione Granger's legacy? It's not just that she saved lives, changed laws, or defeated evil. It's that she did it while remaining wholly herself, flawed, passionate, curious, and deeply human. She taught us that bravery isn't just rushing into battle, it's standing firm when your voice shakes. It's doing your homework when the world mocks you for caring. It's helping your friends, even when your heart is breaking. And it's daring to believe that a better world is possible than actually doing the work to build it. In the end, Hermione Granger is not just the brightest witch of her age. She is its conscience, its architect, its Lionheart, and her story will continue to inspire every reader who ever dared to speak up, to care too much, and to imagine that intelligence, compassion, and love might just be enough to change the world.